Hey guys, it's Emerald Pixel Gaming here and welcome back to another video. In today's tutorial we are going to be having a look at the gamerule command in more detail. So we're going to be taking a look at all the gamerules and showing examples for some of them. So yeah, let's get into this tutorial. So for gamerule, we very obviously have to type in gamerule, and the first gamerule we have is announce advancements. And basically what this means is if somebody gets an advancement, specifically in a server for example, or even in single player, and this is true, then it will show so and so got this advancement and then coloured text and whatever. However, if we put this to false and we press this button, and now let me just go ahead and give myself an advancement. As you can see in the chat, the only thing we have is granted the advancement to Errolf 910. Now let's say if I were to turn this back to true, however, and then press this button, I'm going to go ahead and grant myself a different advancement, and as you can see, now that it's true, we have Errolf 910 has made the advancement Old Betsy. So yeah, that is very useful, especially for servers, or if you simply find it very annoying in any game. The next game rule we have is command block output. Now this one, in my opinion, is essential for multiplayer or a custom map. Now, when a command block does something, so let's say if I were to come to difficulty and do difficulty easy, and here it is, this grey italic text which says at, and then the difficulty has been set to easy because it's coming from a command block. Now, let's say we don't want this, because on a server, if you have constant commands, it's going to completely fill your screen. Or just generally because it's a nuisance, or you don't want to be exposed by a command block or whatever, then we'd come here to the game rule and put false. And then we press this. Let's go ahead and change the difficulty here to normal again, and press it. And now, just to prove it to you, difficulty normal, and there you go. It's as simple as that, and it's extremely useful. So the next game rule we have is disable Elytra movement check. And what this does is it controls whether the server should skip checking player speed when the player is wearing an Elytra. So essentially, having this at false should make the player faster with an Elytra on a server. The next game rule is disable raids, and it's extremely obviously in the name. You won't be raided if you have this game rule to true. So that's good if you want perhaps a more classic survival experience where raids didn't exist in previous versions but on the more modern version of Minecraft. Next we have do daylight cycle, and what this simply does is essentially allows time to progress in the game. So if this were false, it would stay at the same time the whole time. And this is good if you want a custom map which stays at a specific time without changing. The next game rule we have is do entity drops. Now when this is true, when a player dies, his items, or her items, will drop from their inventory where anyone else can pick them up. If this is true, then when a player dies in a multiplayer game, or if you die in a single player game, all of your stuff will drop, which means you can get it back, or if you're on a server, someone else can take it. The next game rule we have is do fire tick, and essentially what this does is it controls whether fire spreads, if fire goes out on its own. So this could also be useful for having an eternal fire. So if I were to do this and set it to true, and now we're going to go ahead and get flint and steel. Now if we wait a few seconds, I'll probably speed this up. As you can see, because the game rule is true, the fire went out. However, if we were to set this to false, and then click here, and then set the fire, the next game rule is do insomnia. Now basically when this is true, phantoms will be able to spawn in the night, so I believe phantoms spawn if you don't sleep for long enough. Now this is useful if once again you want to have a more classic survival experience without stupidly annoying phantoms, or if you're in like some kind of custom map which does have a daylight cycle, other mobs, but you don't want phantoms. So yeah, the next game rule we have is do immediate respawn. Now basically what this does is when it's true, that means that when you die in the game, you won't be given the option to respawn and go back to your main menu. You'll just instantly respawn. So I suppose that is pretty good for servers if you want to do something like that. So if I were to enable this, that's true. And then we're able to do kill Errolf. There you go. As you can see, I'm just straight away here. And yeah, the next game rule we have is do limited crafting. And essentially what this does is it, when true, only allows players to craft recipes that they've unlocked. So by having this false in survival, you just unlock yourself to craft anything. And with it false, you can only do unlocked recipes. So yeah. The next game rule we have is do mob loot. Now, when this is true, if I were to go ahead and kill a skeleton, as you can see in my inventory, as you can see, I've got a bone and arrow. Now, if we were to set this to false, however, and then repeat the process, there you go, it leaves absolutely nothing. The next game rule we have is do mob spawning, and this is another, what I call, essential game rule for a server or custom map. And as it says in the name, if I were to set this to false, then mobs wouldn't spawn. Now, that already happens for me. As you can see, there aren't really any mobs around, except for the sheep. Next we have do patrol spawning, which is quite obviously whether you want patrols to spawn or not. The next game rule is do tile drops. And essentially, if I had this as false, and then clicked here, let's say if I were in survival mode, and let's say there were a block of grass in front of me. Now, let's say I'd like to break this block. As you can see, I've broken it, and nothing comes out of it. The next is a fairly obvious one, it just controls whether traders spawn in the world or not. The next game rule is do weather cycle, and essentially what this does is controls whether weather actually changes. So, if I were to have this as false, then the weather would stay the same. Now it's important to note that if I were to do the weather command and change it, it would change, making this extremely useful for custom maps. The next game rule we have is drowning damage, which obviously controls whether you take damage underwater. Next, fall damage, which just controls whether you get damaged when you fall. And then of course fire damage, which is again obvious. The next game rule we have is forgive dead players. So here's an example. Let's say you were to attack a wolf and the entire group of wolves started chasing after you aggressively. If you were to die in any other way, then when you respawn, if this is true, the dogs will no longer attack you. So I guess this is also kind of useful for custom maps if you want to have like a respawn thing where you respawn and you want those mobs to keep attacking the player. There you go. The next game rule is another one of my absolutely essential ones for servers and custom maps. Keep inventory. Now, if this were to be true, and I click done and then press that, and if I were to do kill and then my username, as you can see, everything in my inventory still exists. Next one, log admin commands, just obviously controls whether it would log admin commands or not. The next one is fairly technical. Max command chain length just basically decides how long a command block chain must be to actually be a chain. The next, max entity cramming, essentially means that if you were to have many entities in a really small space, this would decide how many you would need in order to suffocate. The next game rule, mob griefing, basically decides whether mobs will be able to change blocks, and yeah. The next one is another fairly obvious one. It just means that if true, then the player will be able to naturally regenerate their health, and if false, they will not be able to. The next game rule is a little bit complicated. It's random tick speed, which is essentially how often a random block tick occurs. So for example, a tree growing speed would be affected by this. Perhaps the time would be, and the weather as well. The next command, reduced debug info, essentially gives you less information on the F3 screen. So if we were to do true and click that, and this is what it looks like when it's true. Now let's go ahead and do false, and there you go, we've got the full details. And yeah, the next game rule we have is send command feedback, and if this is true, then let's say I'll give myself an advancement here, grant, and then let's do sleep in bed. As you can see, it says granted the advancement, sweet dreams to Errolf 910. Let's say we don't want this so that everyone can see. So for example, if you're giving yourself stuff through the chat, people will probably see it, and they'll see like given this amount of whatever to, and in your username. So we just do send command feedback false. Done, and we click the button. And now let's try and grant myself another advancement. And as you can see, it no longer says granted the advancement whatever to error of 910. Obviously it does say has made the advancement, but as seen earlier we can also disable that. The next game rule we have is show death messages, and quite obviously it will show or hide death messages. Next we have the spawn radius game rule, which is the number of blocks outward from the world spawn coordinates that a player spawns in when first joining a server or when dying without a personal spawn point. By default this is at 10. Now if you're playing on Bedrock it will be 5, and of course you can change this to whatever you want. Spectators generate chunks is quite obviously where the players in spectator mode able to generate chunks for player in the world. Now I will leave a link in the description to the Minecraft Gamepedia for if you want to read these or kind of refer to them while playing without having to watch a video. I also read some of the stuff from the Gamepedia, and the Gamepedia version will also contain the Bedrock edition commands, which I may include in a separate tutorial. That is the end of this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe, like, leave some feedback, and yeah, I will see you in the next video.